Hey, it's Mike.
And Lindy.
And this is TIY.
The Tiny It Yourself channel.
And today we're going to do our Shiplap walls DIY style out of plywood. This is the internal wall in our tiny house.
We did our shiplap out of plywood, and that's because of our weight limit. Usually shiplap is 3/4 of an inch. We did ours out of 3/8. So that definitely saved us some weight.
And I couldn't even find shiplap at the big box store, and so we're like, we gotta make it ourselves. So we made it ourselves and saved a ton of weight, and I think it was pretty cheap considering. I mean, the whole process, you know, we bought some extra tools, some you didn't necessarily need, so...
We had to route everything.
So step one is we have our 4x8 sheet of plywood, which we then rip into 8-inch thick boards. Step two is routing out the little groove, and then step three is screwing it into the wall.
And then step four is painting it all.
So follow us along. All right, so we'll get into milling in a second, but first I want to take a look at the actual board itself that we're making. And so this is made out of a 3/8 inch piece of plywood. They happen to have this really nice 5-ply stuff at my local big box store, and I have no idea why it was so cheap. It was right next to some really ugly 3/8 inch that was really rough, but this is really smooth on one side and 5-ply, so it's strong. And 3-ply would probably work. I haven't tried it though. So we take our 4-foot wide sheet and then we're cutting 6 strips out of it. And those strips are just shy of 8 inches. So 6 times 8 is 48. And the reason they're just shy of 8 inches is because the blade of the table saw, as you rip them, actually eats away maybe like 1/8 of an inch. And so this makes sure that they're all the same width. Otherwise, the 6th one you cut out would be too short or whatever. Okay, now we can take a look at it from the side and see where we routed out just a notch to do a sort of rabbet joint. And we did a pretty subtle one. Most shiplap has a lot more room there and you can actually screw it in. And we were just like, whatever, we just want the look of it. We don't really care. And so we just have exposed screws on the outside, on the top and the bottom. And normal shiplap, you would screw into the top and then you put one over and then you screw into the top, so you just have one set of exposed nails. But we like the look anyway. Okay, so I'm gonna show you my table saw setup for ripping these boards and some things that I learned from doing it over and over again. All right, so here is my table saw. It's actually one of those super cheap Craftsman Evolvs that you can get online, and it's been amazing so far and a really good deal. And so I just have my blade set, like I said, just shy of 8 inches. So the amount that it's eating away is just the blade thickness, and that way sometimes I'll have a little strip at the end, sometimes I won't. And so it'll just slide through like that and give me exactly the width I want. And this is the big lesson that I learned. And this is, maybe if you had a more expensive table saw, this wouldn't happen, but you know, from shoving the sheets of plywood up against this over and over again, I sometimes would hit this over and knock it over like even just a 1/16 of an inch, and I got some uneven boards, but I caught that pretty quickly, so it wasn't an issue. So this clamp is the ultimate key, and it's been super consistent since I put that on. And one important detail to add here is safety. Definitely make sure that the surface that your board is landing on is about the same as your table saw. Otherwise, you have to do this, which is not safe. Do not do what I'm doing right there. All right, now for what is actually my favorite tool ever, which is the router table. This is, again, like a cheapo Craftsman version, but it's held up really well. And I love it because it's the safest thing ever. It has the shield, and so when you're sliding wood through, there's no way that you could possibly touch it. So theoretically, you can use any router bit that can just take a chunk out like that. And in my case, I'm using a 5/8 inch straight bit, which is basically one of these, but just a little bit wider. And this bit has been really great. I've done maybe 60 to 75 boards with it so far, and it's still sharp, it's still going, it's not doing any burning or anything like that. The distance of this fence and the height of the bit set, so it eats away about 1/4 of an inch from both axes. And then these little combs are great because it keeps it really flat and really even, and it can't kick back at all. And in case you don't want to buy a router table, maybe that's an intimidating thing to do, you can also just do this with one pass on the table saw for a little groove, or 2 passes for the groove that's about this size. And after you've routed an edge, you definitely want to just look down the line of sight and see if there are any imperfections like that, and then you can quickly just run it again through that one little section. When you're first getting set up, you'll probably have a lot more of these, but once you get going, it's pretty easy to prevent. First step here, Lindy is brushing all the dust off so that we don't get some nasty blotches in the paint. Okay, now Lindy is painting, which takes a while. And we are putting the boards that we finished up in the loft so that they don't get nasty. Okay, so once again, we did use spray foam, and we do have metal studs, and metal studs makes our wallboard installation a little bit more complicated. I just wanted to show what we're doing here. First of all, we have this thermal break tape, which is just a double-sided 1/8 of an inch foam tape. And we use the second side of that foam tape to stick to this 6mm poly, which is our vapor barrier and our toxin barrier, because we want to make sure nothing from the spray foam gets through. And for screw layout, we have 24-inch on center studs, and we just did 2 for each stud that we went over. I did them 1 inch from the edge, and then where there was a butt, I did basically just, maybe 1/3 of an inch out. So we've got a bunch of boards done. Obviously, those are painted on the top. We've got about 24 more to put up right here. In case you might be wondering what the process is for going through a little bit of a more complicated board, so I'm going to go through that. This one has a cutout for the door, and then it's also got another cutout for the loft over there behind the ladder. And so what I do is really simple. I just match it up, and then I mark it where it needs to be cut, give it maybe an extra 1/8 of an inch, and then I will measure the distance between here and the top of that door frame and just use a square to finish it off. Okay, so now measuring the same corner without that board, locking to the top of the door jamb, measuring to that front face right there, we're looking at about 4 3/8 inches. Now we're over on the table here, just match up my square, and I go to 4 3/8 inches down. And now I know I just need to go over to the end of the other side of the door there. It's also worth double checking the other side. In this case, it is about 1/8 off. It's more like 4.5 inches. So 4.5 inches. And this is where a 48-inch level comes in handy, because I can just do a straight line from one side to the other. So for the other end, I simply went and measured the cutout for that loft beam and mapped it on here there. And before I cut it with the jigsaw, skill saw, whatever you want to call it, I have developed the method of putting some masking tape on the finished side, because it can rough it up a little bit and sometimes leave little dirty streaks. And I've been reusing the masking tape, actually, because you just put it down for 5 seconds and take it off. And so I'll go all the way around there. Another thing worth mentioning about plywood is you might have some subtle inconsistencies. If you look really close there, it's probably hard to see. There's that stamp left over, and I'm going to cut that out, so it'll be perfect. All right, so here's my setup. I got this guy, which I got for basically free at a farm auction. It was in a box of stuff. I didn't even know it was there. And then I just kind of come up against the edge of a table and go for it. So I just did this cut, and you can really get an idea of that mark that I don't want on the finished surface and why I put this tape here. Also, let's not forget about those tricky corners. If you used a jigsaw before, you just gotta go like this. All right, now I'm gonna do a rough fit with this guy, and I'm gonna leave that tape on just in case I need to make some subtle adjustments. Let's see if it fits. All right, it seems like everything is gonna fit pretty well. Again, there's gonna be pretty fat trim on here, so it doesn't really matter in terms of the fine tolerances. Over here, though, it looks like I'm gonna have to scrape a little insulation off to get that crack to fit, but in general, it's looking like it's gonna do the job. All right, now a quick word about the screws. I'm using these GRK number 8 1¼ inch screws with a little T10 bit on them. And these are great, but they're not perfect, and I couldn't find a perfect screw because these sort of run out of thread on them a little bit too deep in. I prefer if there was a little bit more screw thread on this, because then I could get a really tight fit, and some of these lay just a little bit proud, probably not noticeable to anyone else but me though. They also have that nice sort of self-drilling bit end on them, so I don't have to drill at all. They go right through the metal. Got my crazy board up too, and I'm just screwing it in. I've got this guy pretty much already in there. So that one is entirely flush, but for example, this one, a little bit hard to see, subtly proud. So here are some of the boards I put in so far, and you can see that the screws are very noticeable. I kind of like it, but I like it more in this situation when you've just slightly grazed the screw head and it has that nice white look to it. And so I'm gonna go ahead and do that with all of them, and hopefully it'll look better. So the kitchen boards are complete, and I didn't wanna start with this whole project filming in the beginning because it's totally experimental. I didn't know if it was going to work at all, but now I have it down a little bit, so that's why I feel like it's okay to film now and film the progress. But it's coming along. Almost entirely done in terms of the boards. There are some things I need to do, like I'm going to fill in some of the bigger gaps with some white caulking, and I still need to finish the tops up there. And in terms of the edges, I'm not trying to be crazy precise because I'm going to have some inner corner trim that's going to go right there, but I don't want to have too big of a gap either. Maybe like an 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch is what I've been working with. And here is right around the window. I definitely don't care about how perfect that is because that's going to have some window trim around it, but it's good to at least be consistent and not have some crazy gaps. Okay, progress report. The first floor is basically done, and now I'm getting going on these lofts, which are a little bit tricky. Sometimes you got to get that bottom board to match up all around, but it's worked out pretty well. About to pop that board in right there and cut out the outlet there and so forth, and I just got to keep going. Here's one of the plug cutouts. We went with about 1/8 of an inch extra on all sides, which seems to work out pretty well. On most of them, it was a situation where we could just cut a notch out with a jigsaw for the hole, but this one over here, for example, is just a cutout inside of a board, and so we just simply drilled about 1/4 of an inch bit and then put the jigsaw blade in. All right, it's coming along, making a bit more progress on that second loft. Everything's going pretty smoothly, just going board by board by board. All right, I got a little bit of a unique challenge here. I've got all of my mini split pipes and wires coming out there. I'm gonna do a big board from there all the way to about there. So I need to try and get this piece in this hole through that, and that's copper, so we'll see if it works. Just leaving that hanging there because the one time out of every single board I've put up in the house so far, somehow we missed this. As you can see the problem, it gets really small right there, and I need to just chisel that out, which is going to be annoying, but it's necessary. So change of plans, that would actually be a lot of chiseling to do, especially on a ladder. But the good thing about the Shiplap in comparison to tongue and groove is I can just undo these points, and this happens to be a shorter one. I can just undo these 6 screws, take it out, and slide it back in when it's routed. I can just reroute this part, put it back in. Boom. All right, I routed that, and that's how much I took off. So problem solved, and I'm ready to keep it going. All right, now for another update on the wall. It is almost entirely done. There's just maybe a couple slivers that I need to put in, like right there, but it's done otherwise. And so it's time to move on to the next thing. It's a little dark in the loft right now, but the loft is done as well, and we're experimenting with some ceiling panels. We're gonna do 1/4 inch and put some more screws in so it doesn't bow down. And hopefully that'll be good.
So originally we were going for the aesthetic of a whitewash look, but we found that the tannins from the wood started to leak through that. So we just decided to do several coats of just a white paint.
Yeah, and maybe there's some type of like primer or some type of sealant you can do and then whitewash over and get the nice whitewashed effect with the gray without like, we're getting weird colors in there, kind of like pukey colors bleeding through. So let's just do full white, and it turned out pretty good. So that's about it for today.
Follow us on our other social media account, our Tiny It Yourself on Instagram. Also, please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.
Peace.
Bye.